welcome back to our channel. Together, we'll navigate the intricate maze of relationships, offering insights and guidance along the way. Experiencing change can be a peculiar sensation, especially when faced with the prospect of moving to a new city after spending years rooted in one place, retiring from a job that you've dedicated decades to, or being released from prison. Today, Ella found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, she felt excitement at finally regaining her freedom, but on the other hand, she knew that this marked a significant turning point in her life. The uncertainty of what awaited her outside filled her with anxiety. Over the years, the prison had become a strangely familiar place, almost like a home, and the idea of leaving it behind and starting anew brought a mix of excitement and apprehension. Within those prison walls, Ella had formed meaningful relationships with some of the other inmates. Their friendships had blossomed, and these fellow prisoners had become like family to her. Their shared experiences and support had helped them all cope with the challenges of incarceration, making their bonds incredibly meaningful. Unlike the typical packing for a new journey, Ella didn't have personal items to gather. She would only be given back the clothes she arrived in, the same outfit she wore on the day her sentence began. This simple act of putting on her old clothes would be the initial step in re-entering a world that had undoubtedly changed during her time behind bars. As Ella prepared to leave, she noticed envious glances from some inmates who still had time left in their sentences. Those looks served as a reminder that not everyone had been fortunate enough to regain their freedom. "It's your time, huh? Wow. It really has been 10 years, Ella Selmy remarked, her voice tinged with disbelief and a hint of sadness. "Yeah, me neither. It feels strange," Ella replied, her emotions wavering as the reality of her departure began to sink in. For the past 7 days, sleep had eluded Ella due to the constant worry about her impending release. Despite the anxiety gnawing at her, Ella resolved to maintain her daily routine, clinging to the familiar patterns that had sustained her for the past 10 years. She hoped that in the midst of the whirlwind of emotions, sticking to these habits would bring some measure of comfort. Stepping outside the prison, she was met with a bright and sunny day, squinting as the sun's rays warmed her face. A gentle breeze tousled her hair, offering a refreshing contrast to the warmth. As she surveyed her surroundings, the absence of anyone waiting for her became apparent. The only person who would have eagerly anticipated her release was Ella's mother, but sadly, she had passed away the previous year, leaving Ella to confront her newfound freedom in solitude. With no knowledge of her father either, Ella felt truly alone. Reaching the bus stop, a few individuals were already waiting for the city-bound bus. Boarding it, Ella settled into a seat by the window. As the bus set off on its journey, she gazed outside, lost in contemplation while the world passed by. The people beyond the bus windows moved freely, a stark contrast to the restricted life Ella had known for the past decade. Overwhelmed, she leaned her head against the window and shed soft tears, reflecting on the 10 arduous years now behind her. Those years had been riddled with worry, anxiety, and seemingly endless pain, making her feel as though her day of liberation would never arrive. One significant aspect of her life she had left behind was her career in nursing, where she had excelled as a skilled specialist. Even the elderly prison doctor had humorously remarked, "I know it sounds silly, but I wish you could stay here a little longer. I'm going to have a hard time without your help, to be honest." Though light-hearted, Ella knew her abilities had made a difference during her time in prison. Now, as she ventured back into the outside world, she pondered whether she could reclaim her position as a proficient professional. While the doctor's humor might have been well-intentioned, Ella didn't particularly appreciate it, given the gravity of the situation. Ella had keenly observed the way he treated the inmates, as if they were mere creatures rather than fellow human beings. In stark contrast, she approached her fellow prisoners with care and compassion, believing that everyone, no matter their circumstances, deserved empathy and respect. Being in a prison with limited medical resources, Ella had to rely on her resourcefulness and empathy to devise treatments for various ailments afflicting her fellow inmates: migraines, arthritis, hernias, and more. Her reputation as a skilled and compassionate healer quickly spread, drawing long queues of people seeking her help. Even the prison guards recognized her expertise, turning to her for advice and treatment recommendations. During the bus ride, Ella's thoughts revolved around her future employment prospects. The looming question was whether anyone would be willing to hire an ex-convict, especially one with an armed robbery conviction on her record. The burden of overcoming the stigma associated with her past weighed heavily on her mind, but she was determined to try. It saddened her that society seemed to disregard the distinction between truly dangerous individuals and those who had fallen victim to unfortunate circumstances, like herself. The journey back in time brought back memories of Luke, a strong, brave, and charismatic individual. Ella used to be captivated by the resonance of his deep voice. They crossed paths when Ella was caring for his elderly grandmother, Mrs. Gabriel. Luke's unwavering devotion and constant showering of gifts and treats upon his grandmother had left a lasting impression on Ella. His outward kindness had made it difficult for Ella to see through his true intentions, ultimately leading her down a regrettable path she would never have chosen on her own. One fateful day, Luke whisked Ella away to an upscale restaurant, lavishing her with opulent delicacies and sparing no expense. The attraction between them was magnetic, leading to a whirlwind of a passionate love affair. However, their happiness was short-lived as Ella's life took a dramatic turn one day when she burst through the door to a heart-wrenching scene. Amidst the cries and screams of her distraught mother, Lily, Ella's daughter, was taken away, forever altering the course of her life. As the case was investigated, Lily gradually unraveled the truth about Luke. He wasn't the noble prince she had once believed him to be. Instead, he was a deceitful swindler. Lily discovered that Ella kept a key chain with access to her patients' homes, as people had trusted the young caregiver to enter their residences. Some were too frail to answer the door themselves, and relying on relatives all the time wasn't practical. Unbeknownst to Ella, the trust she had earned from her patients became a tool of exploitation in the hands of the person she had fallen in love with. Luke used the keys she possessed to commit multiple home robberies. Eventually apprehended by the police, he resorted to shifting blame onto Ella. He falsely claimed she was the mastermind behind the criminal operation, portraying her as the brains behind the thefts. This devastating twist of events shattered Ella, betrayed not only by the man she loved but also facing the terrifying prospect of being wrongfully convicted for crimes she never committed. Ella's life crumbled like a fragile house of cards, and she found herself teetering on the edge of despair, contemplating ending her own life. However, fate intervened, and a wise, older inmate named Amy came to her rescue. Serving time for accidentally killing her abusive husband, Amy had her own struggles to bear. Nevertheless, her arrival became a turning point for Lily, offering a glimmer of hope in the darkest of times. The bond between the two women grew strong, offering Lily the much-needed support and strength to confront the challenges ahead. "Don't even think about it, Lily," Amy warned with firmness. "You're young and beautiful. Whatever happens, keep doing good things and leave the past behind. You'll see what happens. Mark my words." Those words resonated with Ella, becoming a source of comfort and motivation in her darkest moments for years to come. The bus reached Ella's stop, and she stepped off, scanning her surroundings for any familiar landmarks amidst the changed cityscape. A decade had passed since she last laid eyes on this place, and she knew it would look different now. Her favorite coffee shop was gone, replaced by a bank office. As she walked the streets, Ella couldn't help but feel disoriented by the unfamiliarity of her once well-known neighborhood. New shops, restaurants, and buildings had sprung up, leaving her feeling like a stranger in her own city. Approaching her childhood home, Ella's heart swelled with nostalgia. The overgrown yard evoked a sense of sadness, contrasting the meticulously manicured space she once knew. The front porch, where she shared countless conversations with her mother, now stood empty and lifeless. Despite the changes, Ella found comfort and familiarity within those walls, allowing herself to bask in the memories of her past, even amidst the challenges that lay ahead. Stepping into the quiet house, the absence of her mother's presence was palpable. Ella sank onto the couch, covering her face with her hands, overwhelmed by grief and loss. She couldn't help but envision her poor mother, weeping alone and unable to afford a good lawyer to help her daughter during the trial, a heart-wrenching thought that tugged at her emotions. The realization of her mother's absence filled Ella's eyes with pain, and she silently wept for the one who would never welcome her back home. Despite the overwhelming emotions, Ella was determined not to shed any more tears. She rose from her seat and approached the mirror, looking intently at her reflection. With steely resolve, she urged herself to smile, even if it felt forced. In that moment, Ella knew the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but she was unwavering in her determination to make the best of her new life. She believed in her own strength and resilience, and with that thought, she straightened her posture, took a deep breath, and bravely stepped forward. "Come on, pull yourself up by your bootstraps," Ella muttered, addressing her reflection. "No complaints, no regrets. You can do this." Renewed with determination, she began cleaning and organizing the house. With a bucket and mop in hand, she scrubbed the floors, eager to embrace the life she had been given. Despite the lingering sense of loss and grief, Ella understood she had to keep moving forward, one step at a time. A week later, she received a phone call from her old friend Hannah, with whom she used to work. Hannah had been in touch with Ella's mother and learned about her release from prison. Hearing a friendly voice on the other end of the line, Ella eagerly caught up with her old friend, finding comfort in the semblance of normalcy. "What's the plan now?" Hannah inquired. "First, I need a job to support myself," Ella replied. Suddenly, a thought struck her. "Actually, you know what? We need to meet as soon as possible. I think I can help you with that. I was recently offered a very well-paying job, but I can't leave my current job. Why don't you take it?" Hannah's interest perked up at the suggestion. "Your resume doesn't matter for this job, trust me," Hannah reassured Ella during their meeting. She proceeded to share an opportunity with Ella, an affluent family seeking a caregiver capable of handling intense stress. Their son had been paralyzed in a terrible car accident and possessed a difficult personality, leading many caregivers to quit after just a few days. Desperate to find someone who could manage their son's behavior, the father was open to hiring anyone, regardless of their background, as long as they could handle the challenging situation. When Hannah mentioned the salary, Ella's eyes widened in surprise. The offered pay was beyond her expectations, enough to sustain her for a year and even afford a better headstone for her mother's grave. Though excited about the financial prospects, Ella couldn't help but feel apprehensive about caring for such a difficult patient. Yet, with Hannah's encouragement, she decided to give it a chance. 3 days later, Ella stood outside a vast mansion, where a stern-looking security guard checked her ID before allowing her in. Despite her nerves, she tried to remain composed as she walked through the grand entrance and into the awe-inspiring foyer. The opulence surrounding her left her feeling humbled. The ornate furnishings and expansive rooms were a far cry from her modest apartment, reminding her of the stark wealth disparity in society. The mansion was extravagant beyond anything she had ever seen, even in the media. No amount of screen time could capture its true magnificence. As Ella followed an important-looking servant through the corridors, she couldn't help but be astounded by the size and opulence of everything around her. Each room seemed grander and more luxurious than the last, overwhelming her senses. Finally, they reached a massive hall that resembled a train station vestibule. The high ceiling made her feel small, while the chandeliers cast a warm yellow glow, adding to the spectacle of the room. The walls adorned with paintings and sculptures conveyed a sense of grandeur and wealth. Ella, though anxious, did her best to appear composed as she entered the hall. At the center of the room, a gray-haired man sat at a large oak table, motioning for her to take a seat across from him. Feeling the piercing gaze of the owner upon her, Ella settled into the chair, aware of the man's aura of wealth and power. In the silence, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock, Ella felt as if she were in a pivotal scene from a movie, where the hero encounters the villain. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the man spoke. His voice was low and authoritative, indicating he was accustomed to having things go his way. "I have a proposition for you," he said, never averting his gaze from Ella's. "My son is a difficult patient, as you've been told. Countless caregivers have tried, but none have succeeded in handling his behavior. However, I sense something different about you, Mississippi." "Ella," he said, acknowledging her name. "I believe you have the potential to succeed where others have failed, and I'm willing to offer you generous compensation for your services. But be warned, my son is not easy to deal with." The man introduced himself as Owen Hill, the father of Justin, his ill son. He emphasized the need for patience and experience in caring for Justin, making it clear that he couldn't tolerate those who created unnecessary drama over trivial matters. "My name is Ella," she replied softly. Taking in Frank's unwavering gaze and stern demeanor, Ella knew she had to tread carefully if she wanted to excel in this role. With a nod of agreement, she relievedly passed Frank's initial assessment. Frank picked up his phone and dialed someone, summoning an old lady into the hall a few moments later. "Ella, this is Mrs. Wyatt, our housekeeper," Frank introduced, pointing to the woman. "Mrs. Wyatt, this is Ella. She'll be taking care of Justin. Please show her everything she needs to know." Ella observed a shift in Mr. Duncan's demeanor. He seemed to lose interest in her almost immediately. Despite feeling a twinge of disappointment, Ella brushed it off and focused her attention on Mrs. Wyatt. Mrs. Wyatt turned out to be a sweet and considerate person. She greeted Ella with a warm smile, and the two began chatting as they strolled through the mansion. Mrs. Wyatt familiarized Ella with the various rooms she would need to utilize, including the kitchen, laundry room, and Justin's bedroom. Providing detailed instructions, she warned Ella about some of Justin's more challenging behaviors. "He can be quite stubborn at times," Mrs. Wyatt confided in a hushed voice. "But he's a good boy at heart, he just needs someone patient and caring to take care of him." Ella listened attentively, grateful for the insider insights. Finally, Mrs. Wyatt led Ella to the room where she would be staying. The room, though small, felt cozy, with a comfortable-looking bed and a window overlooking the garden. Ella felt a sense of relief and gratitude, knowing she had her own space in this vast mansion. "Is there anything else you need?" Mrs. Wyatt asked, her eyes twinkling with friendliness. Ella shook her head, appreciative of the older woman's kindness. "No, this is perfect. Thank you for showing me around, Mrs. Wyatt. I really appreciate it." Mrs. Wyatt patted her hand affectionately, beaming at Ella. "You're welcome, dear. We're all here to support you in any way we can. Now, let's get you settled in, shall we? You can take a shower, put on your uniform, and get to work. Call me when you're ready, and I'll introduce you to Justin. You'll find everything you need in that closet." "Great," Ella replied, feeling grateful for Mrs. Wyatt's assistance. "Thanks again for everything." Mrs. Wyatt gave her one last smile before departing, leaving Ella alone in the room, ready to embark on this new chapter of her life with determination and hope. Ella glanced around the room, feeling a wave of relief wash over her as she realized she had a private space to call her own. The room's spaciousness and abundant natural light helped ease her initial nervousness. Noticing the attached bathroom and toilet, Ella felt even more grateful for the convenience. A neatly hung uniform in the closet caught her eye, and she wasted no time changing into it, embracing a sense of professionalism. She understood the seriousness of her new role and wanted to present herself appropriately. Ella also spotted the medical room just across the hall from her quarters, filled with the latest tools and equipment, ready for any medical emergencies. The easy accessibility of these resources reassured her. Feeling refreshed and prepared, Ella showered and donned her uniform. Nervous yet determined, she readied herself to meet Justin for the first time. Taking a deep breath, she informed Mrs. Wyatt that she was ready. Later that evening, Mrs. Wyatt guided Ella into the living room, which appeared more like a grand hall than a typical living space. The room boasted high ceilings and opulent, ornate furniture. As she followed Mrs. Wyatt, Ella couldn't help feeling a twinge of nervousness. Seated on a plush sofa was Mrs. Paisley Duncan, Frank's wife, a beautiful woman who exuded both grace and confidence in the lavish surroundings. To Ella's surprise, Mrs. Duncan greeted her warmly, and they promptly delved into the business at hand. "Welcome, Ella. It's so nice to finally meet you," Mrs. Duncan said, extending her hand. "I hope you're settling in." Ella felt at ease by Mrs. Duncan's friendly approach. "Thank you, Mrs. Duncan." "Yes, things are going well so far," she replied with a sense of relief. They engaged in a lengthy conversation, covering everything from Justin's condition to Ella's own background and interests. Ella was genuinely moved by Mrs. Duncan's kind and approachable nature, despite her considerable wealth and status. As the conversation began to wind down, Mrs. Duncan gazed at Ella with a serious expression. "I want you to know that we're counting on you, Ella. Justin is a very challenging patient, and we've gone through many caregivers before you. We're placing our trust in you and expect you to do your best for him." Ella nodded with a sense of understanding, feeling the weight of responsibility settling upon her shoulders. "Don't be afraid, okay?" Mrs. Duncan reassured her with kindness in her eyes. "I know you've heard a lot about Justin, but he's not a monster. The accident changed him, and he can be a little spoiled, but deep down, he's a good person. He can be difficult at times, but I hope you can build a good relationship with him. As his stepmother, Justin can't stand me, but I believe you might have a different experience." Ella found comfort in Mrs. Duncan's words. She knew the job would be demanding, but it was reassuring to hear that Justin wasn't the monstrous figure some had portrayed him to be. "I'll do my best, Mrs. Duncan," Ella replied, resolved to make a positive impact. "Thank you for your advice and support." "Call me Paisley," Mrs. Duncan said with a warm smile. "We're all in this together, Ella. And remember, if you ever need anything, just let me know." Paisley's charm and warmth contrasted with the coldness that emanated from Justin when Ella entered the room. Taking a moment to observe Justin, Ella noticed how much he resembled his father, with sharp features and piercing eyes. Justin sat in an armchair, seemingly lost in thought as he stared at the crackling fire in the fireplace. Ignoring Ella's greetings, he didn't acknowledge her presence. Undeterred, Ella approached him confidently, determined to connect with him. She stood before him, patiently waiting for any sign of acknowledgement. When Justin continued to remain unresponsive, Ella took a deep breath and spoke, hoping to break through the walls he had erected. "Hello, Justin. My name is Ella. I'm going to be your caregiver from now on. I'm here to help you in any way I can," Ella began, her voice gentle and reassuring. Justin remained silent, his gaze fixed on the fire. Ella didn't want to push too hard too soon, so she patiently waited, taking in the opulence of the room's furnishings and artwork. As time stretched on, Justin finally turned his head to look at her. His gaze was cold and penetrating, sending a shiver down Ella's spine. She met his intense stare, refusing to back down. After a moment, Justin spoke in a low, serious tone. "I don't need your help," he said flatly. "I can take care of myself." Despite feeling a hint of frustration at his stubbornness, Ella remained composed and professional. "I understand that you're used to being independent, Justin," she replied calmly. "But I'm here to make things easier for you. I can help you with anything you need." Ella's response held a glimmer of understanding, acknowledging Justin's desire for independence while assuring him of her presence to provide support whenever required. She hoped her approach would foster a connection with him, breaking through the initial barriers and establishing a foundation of trust. That's the end of my story. I hope it inspired you, entertained you, or made you think. If you want to hear more stories from me, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to get notified when I upload a new video. And let me know what you think of this story in the comments section. I love reading your opinions and suggestions. Until then, stay awesome.